Good evening. Welcome to the QCIS channel, where you get your daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. My name is Leon Jones, and during this segment, I'm going to ask this question, and that question will be used as the title of tonight's video. And the question, as well as the title to tonight's video, is why do we use building codes? Why do we use building codes? Let me share my screen. Well, when it comes to the background in the United States, building codes usually refer to model codes, which is noted are developed in a national form. National form could be IBC, International Building Codes, IRC, International Residence Codes, or any other code sponsored by our organization. Now, the reason why we use codes is they're designed to protect buildings and the people and the property inside them from fire, earthquakes, windstorms, and of course, other extreme events. They are also utilized to ensure structural integrity, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical system safety, as well as accessibility and practical and achievable levels of course, energy efficiency. And coming up, I'm going to show you some examples of some building codes. Now, building codes underpin the work of architects, engineers, builders, and developers. Why? Because architects and engineers must ensure their building designs meet or exceed the minimum legally mandated code requirement for a particular jurisdiction. Now, the local building department reviews plans submitted to them before construction, and they issue permits before people can proceed with building a project. When I say proceed, we call it a notice to proceed. Now, inspectors usually verify the project as constructed, and it basically has to comply with the building codes. Now, the building industry stakeholders affected by building codes include contractors, subcontractors, manufacturers of building products and materials, insurance companies, facility managers, building owners, tenants, as well as building inspectors. Now, the strength of a jurisdiction's building code affects the competitiveness of builders and building suppliers alike. Now, remember something about codes. Codes do change, particularly the ICC codes. They change I'm going to say every 3 years. Now, the newest codes came out last year in 2021. Now, I know the state of Indiana, I believe they're using still the 2012 or the 2015. Now, code changes enable innovation in the building sector and permit more innovative products and processes, of course, to gain market share. Now, as new building requirements are reviewed through the model code, just as I told you, revision, when I talk about revision, they're talking about codes. They take place every 3 years. Why? Because innovative stakeholders make their cases for inclusion. These innovations add value to buildings and improve their impact on health and safety. Now, to the extent an innovation leads to enhanced construction industry job skills, and of course, it increases the workers' market value as well. Now, again, the codes that I'm basically talking about, when we get into the model codes, they're called the I codes. The I codes are the international codes. Now, the international codes come from the ICC, which is the International Code Council, which was founded in 1994 by the 3 regionally based model code organization BOCA, which BOCA stands for the Building Officials and Code Administrators International, ICBO, which is the International Conference of Building Officials, and SBCCI, the Southern Building Code Congress International Incorporated. Now, the purpose was to streamline the building regulatory system through a single family of codes that offer consistency and compatibility to multiple layers of requirements existing at the federal, state, and local level. Now, the final consolidation of ICC occurred in 2003, culminating in one organization with a combined history offering more than a century of experience in developing model construction codes. Now, the ICC's updated versions happen every 3 years, or we say the additions, they happen every 3 years, and basically comprise a set of 15 integrated, topical, geographically specific model codes, including the International Building Code, now the International Resident Code, and of course the International Existing Building Code. Now, the 2012 edition of the I-Codes contains provisions consistent with minimum flood resistant design and construction requirements for buildings of the National Flood Insurance Program, known as NFIP. Now, the ICC also publishes the International Green Construction Code, IGCC, developed in partnership with the American Institute of Architects, which is known as the AIA, ASTM, which is the American Standard for Testing and Materials, ASHRAE deals with HVAC, USGBC, and IES. Now, the IGCC offers a streamlined administrative process that is coordinated with other commonly adopted I-codes and becomes a baseline for regulating sustainable construction. Now, NFPA codes are your fire codes, prompted by electrical and fire safety in the late 1800s. Well, NFPA stands for the National Fire Protection Association. Now, that was the first to develop the model codes. Now, understand that the NFPA develops, publishes, and disseminates more than 300 consensus codes and standards designed to help prevent and minimize the effects of fire and other hazards. Now, of course, when it comes to the history of codes, the Code of Hammurabi took place around 1800 BC and is generally recognized as the world's first building code. Although this code was basically a criminal statute that included capital punishment for shoddy workmanship that resulted in death. Now, the reason why America had to have its codes because there were some great fires that happened, and the great fires happened not just in America, also happened in Europe as well. 64 AD in Rome, 1666 in London, but here in America, Boston in 1631, of course, Chicago in 1871, Baltimore in 1904, and of course, Cleveland in 1929. Now, because of those fires, that led to soul searching and of course, new regulations. And around this time also, since we got more into the industrial age, that's when OSHA came about too. So basically the beginning of modern codes can be traced back to 1897, and that was the publication of the NFPA's National Electrical Code, known as the NEC. Now today, the 2014 NFPA 70 NEC covers the latest requirements on electrical wiring and of course, equipment installation issues, including provisions for the use of connections, voltage markings, conductors, and of course, cables. Now, after doing all that talking about codes, codes are very important. Now, again, I take a codes class at Ivy Tech. It's BCOM 210. it's a good course. Now, let me show you something. Right here. This is my code book. 2015 edition. It's been out for 7 years. They have the 2018 and they have the 2021. Now, what I'm going to do is show you some examples of some codes. So just bear with me, because it is very, very important that you understand that codes, in my humble opinion, I just read it to you, they provide safety. And you have a lot of insurance when it comes to projects. Now, let me share my screen again. And let's go back. And I'm going to take you to some codes here. I'm gonna take you so I can show you what some of the codes look like. Now, there are different codes out here. I'm going to take you to the international existing building codes, because what I want you all to know is, what do the codes actually look like? Okay, I'm in the international existing building code, that's known as the IEBC. Now, the codes are, of course, divided up into different sections. Now, the first section of the codes you see deals with scope and administration. Chapter 1, and then you go into section 101, and then you have your subsections, your title, which has your name of jurisdiction, because a number of your codes actually run off of the IBC. You have your intent, your applicability, buildings not being occupied, buildings occupied. And then you have your, going back, your scope and application, your applicability gives you some codes here, conflicts, because sometimes codes will refer you to other codes. Then you have your administration and enforcement, your Department of Building Safety, and these you should know, because now if you are wanting to be an inspector, you definitely should understand how codes work. You also have your duties and powers of code officials. And then chapter 2 is very important, particularly if you're taking a test. Chapter 2 deals with a lot of your definitions. And on a test, you will see these definitions. What is a mezzanine? What is an addition? What is a code official? Your definitions are always in section 2. Now, what's in section 3? That's your occupancy codes. You also have administration. Now, I'm in the 2015, so again, remember something, codes change every year. You have repairs. Now, let me take you to a different one. I'm in the international existing building code. Let me take you to the IBC. The IBC is what most of us go by, the International Building Code. Here we go. This is the one that most of us are familiar with. Now, I'm in the International Building Code, and because I know the building code, I know chapter 1 is your administration. Chapter 2 is where you have your definitions. Chapter 3 is your occupation or occupancy and classification. Type of construction is chapter 6. Chapter 4 is your special detail. Chapter 5, that's your height requirements. Now, I'm doing a lot of these by memory, but I'm going to show you what's in them so you'll know. As chapter 3, you generally have your classification. Now, in these codes, you have your assembly, your business, your educational, your factory, and industrial. It's very important that you understand what each mean. And me, I like studying codes because you can apply these codes to your design. And it's very important that when you design something, it's designed correctly. And in my next video, I'm going to talk about standards and specifications. Talked about it a while back, but I didn't show you what they actually look like. You're going to get an idea of what they actually look like. Like right now, I'm showing you what these codes look like. And one thing about these codes, you get a chapter and then it breaks it down into a sub-chapter, and then it breaks it down again, like assembly. How do I know what an assembly is? Well, it tells you, and it tells you what group that assembly is in. Tells you what's in that group, like small buildings, small assemblies. And if you want to go down, let's say I want to find the height. Chapter 5 tells you the height. Let me give you an example. You also have your definitions as well. Now, when I get to 503, let's say if I'm building a building with some special industrial occupancies, well, the code is going to tell you buildings and structures designed to house special industrial processes require large areas and unusual building heights to accommodate craneways. Now, what's a craneway? A craneway is a mechanized crane. Now, you have your tower crane and you have your crane with your boom. Now, before you can even put a crane with a boom on a site, must load test that crane. Why? Because you don't want to put too much weight on that crane or it will tip over. And then you have safety specifications for that as well. You also, when we deal with height, we deal with types of construction. We also deal with building heights and number of stories. Now, I know codes can be boring to some, but you need to understand the code because if you're going to build something, most of your jurisdictions, your federal, your state, and your city or your local municipality, they go by these codes. Some examples, types of construction. It's under chapter 6. You want to know where your fire is? That's chapter 7. Anything that deals with interior finishes is chapter 8. Fire protection, chapter 9. What about exits? That's known as egress, chapter 10. Accessibility, chapter 11. And so on, and so on, and so on. Interior environment. You want to know about energy? Now, of course, you have codes that refer to one another, but they're basically laid out the same way. And they're laid out that way because you want to keep consistency. Chapter 16, structural design. Chapter 15 goes back to roofs. And when you deal with 16, you're an engineer, you deal with dead loads, live loads, snow loads, soil. Again, what I'm doing is showing you an example of what's in a code, what a code looks like, construction documents, because it's very pertinent, or let me use a better word, it's very important that you understand codes. Many people don't understand codes, and if something happens, they're going to be liable for a lawsuit and they may lose their license. Look at that building that collapsed in Miami. Look at that bridge that collapsed in Miami. This is why when you're an inspector, you need to understand the codes as well so you can inspect it properly. Codes, and of course, specifications, and of course, your plans, they are your chart way to a safe building. So you have to check everything. So in the long run, when it comes to these codes, you need to understand what's in the codes. Now, again, before you go anywhere, if you don't know anything about codes, look at chapter 1 and 2, because you need to know the administration and you need to know your definitions, because definitions are all through the codes. Now, you can order a code book from ICC or you can look at it online. Either way, you need to understand the codes. The codes are going to be your best friend when you are dealing with construction. Now, again, I've been in the construction business for 30 years, and I can tell you this about codes: they do change. You have to keep up with the latest codes. Now, again, your state is going to have codes as well. And I guarantee the codes that your state is using go right along with the IBC. Again, so you know, this is what I'm using. This is what we're using in the state of Indiana, the International Building Code. Very important. Very important that you keep up with the codes, because as buildings continue to innovate, codes are going to change. And you have a number of people who sit on boards. Again, I told you about the IBC, told you about BOCA. Well, the ICC is the one that comprises of all those organizations. So you can have one cohesive message. Now we're doing a lot of construction for green buildings. And what do I mean by green buildings? I'm talking about energy efficient buildings. So what can I say about energy efficient buildings? Well, you have sprinkler systems that cut on and off because they have sensors in them. You have automatic flush toilets, lighting. You have programmable thermostats. You need to look at all those codes for what you need to do. Even if you're placing guardrail. Now, you remember something in a building. This is in one of the codes as well. Accessibility, chapter 11, that's ADA. Have to have everything ADA compliant for handicapped people. But when you're putting up a guardrail on a side, it can be no higher than 42 inches and no lower than 30 inches. Remember that code. And that's just an example of a code. But overall, when it comes to codes, codes are there to ensure that the building is going to be safe for occupancy, and it's going to be designed to the proper codes. Because in the end, when it comes to any project, yes, you want the project to be built on time and built under budget, but you also want a project for safe occupancy. And that concludes this topic on building codes. If you like what I just presented, please comment, share, and subscribe. And if you're looking for some social content, check out the 401 Talk Zone radio show. I do live streams on that every Friday, unless something happens. And I'm working on getting the Blog Talk radio show back. But now, can't find the 401 Talk Zone radio show or the QCIS channel, you can always check me out on Twitter. Now, when it comes to the QCIS channel, I go one step further. The QCIS channel is on my LinkedIn channel. I put the content there because it's a professional channel. And once again, I thank you for listening to the QCIS channel, where you get your daily dose science, technology, engineering, and math. Till next time, my name is Leon Jones. I want you to have a wonderful and gracious evening.